Try to decipher the budget of the North Carolina Department of Transportation, and you will likely have a tough time figuring out what's going on and why, where the money's coming from, and where it's going. Our next guest is an expert at analyzing agency budgets. And in the wake of a scathing audit of the Department of Transportation by the state auditor, Beth Wood, our Joe Coletti is helping us understand exactly what's going on with the DOT's budget. Joe is senior fellow here at the John Locke Foundation. He's been writing about this at johnlocke.org. Joe, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here.
Set the table for us, if you would. Tell us about this audit of DOT from State Auditor Beth Wood. It was pretty tough.
This is the latest in a number of challenges and reports taking a look at DOT that have not been kind to the department. And the auditor found that the Department of Transportation had overspent by $742 million of what it was and you can't say that it was over budget because one of the findings was that they really kind of don't have a budget. So, but they had a cash flow plan.
Not good on two fronts.
Right, yeah. So they had a cash flow plan, and when they looked at that cash flow plan versus what was actually spent, that was the $742 million, which actually matched up really well with what McKinsey had reported back in September when there were the first concerns about what's going on at DOT. And all of this stems back to concerns about how much cash DOT had accumulated over time. The legislature wanted them to spend that down, wanted them to make more, be faster with projects, getting those out, and offered some opportunity to borrow money to be able to speed that up if they had to lower cash flow. And then they put a cash floor onto that, and all of this just kept compounding itself into more problems, so that the DOT trying to get the money to qualify for the bonds by having a lower amount in cash overspent all of that cash, $742 million according to the auditor, and that was to be able to get more projects out. So
you're making my hair hurt here. With this.
There's no good plans coming in, and they spent a lot of money going out, and that was so that they could spend even more money. That's really.
So, yeah. Joe, here's the curious thing. I mean, I'm not a fiscal expert like you are, but I just know that I presume that the state legislature, which appropriates money to state government and different agencies, that they would say, okay, Department of Transportation, here is the amount of money that you will receive for the next fiscal year. Right. Operate your agency, repair the roads, do your projects, etc. But what you're describing is so far from that. Right. Why is DOT so different? Why does it not operate like that?
Yeah, there's a few reasons for that. One is that most of DOT's budget does not come from the general fund. So all of the state money that the Department of Transportation gets is not general fund, which is where the legislature usually steps in and is involved on a line-by-line basis.
Right.
The DOT gets money from the Highway Fund and the Highway Trust Fund, which are funded by gas taxes, sales taxes on cars, registrations, all of the licensing that you do to be able to drive on the roads. All of that money then goes into the Department of Transportation, and then you pull down another chunk of money from the federal government. But then, and they have kind of large pools of money that goes into. But the money actually gets spent by the divisions, and there are 7 divisions across the state. And so there's a general plan that says we're going to spend money on highways, and we're going to spend money on secondary roads, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. But then the money goes to the agencies, to those divisions, as a mass, and then those divisions spend that money on individual projects. And so, when you take a look at the state budget, you end up with double counting of all of these things, and so there's not really the same kind of oversight from the General Assembly in the first place, and then the department operates in a different way, and they're doing road projects because they're multiple year projects. They don't account for them in the same way that most of the operating budget gets accounted for.
Even though it's obviously complicated and unlike most state agencies, doesn't the Department of Transportation have internal auditors or internal project managers whose job one would presume is to watch over the money, what's going out, what's coming in, and presumably also saying, hey, wait a second, we're working on a project and we're running out of cash?
Yeah, that's one of the problems that was found, was that there's not a really
pretty
good
fundamental.
Yeah. They don't have they don't have those solid internal controls either. That there's the lack of external control from the General Assembly, but there's also lacking internal controls, and that was clear in the auditor's recommendations too, because the auditor focused all of the attention on the chief engineer instead of on the chief financial officer. The engineer, right, you can tell by the title, is working on how do we get projects through.
Right.
And
this bridge, this road
right.
needs to stand the test of time.
And the chief financial officer, chief fiscal officer, should be the one who's saying, okay, here's how much money we have, how we're doing on plan, and they're just all of those controls that you would think are there weren't. And it's been a long-standing problem. The rush to spend the money during 2019 is what led to blew away what little guardrails they had.
So, Joe, you have described it really well. In fact, I love the headline on your piece, which, folks, by the way, you can read this at johnlocke.org. It's a really good explanation of this mess, the budget being full of cracks, potholes, and detours. So what do we do now? Because clearly, as taxpayers, and I'm sure there's people within the DOT agency itself who were kind of embarrassed about this. Right. What do we do to go forward and rein all this in, make sure they do their job and they know how much money they have and they know when to stop spending? Yeah,
so there have been recommendations, and that's one of the things that is being sorted out now. One of the recommendations was that the Office of State Budget and Management have a more active role in overseeing the Department of Transportation. The OSBM said thank you, but no. But they are working on how do you provide the money in a more reasonable way, in a more standard way, putting actual budgets in place at the Department of Transportation, and then aligning those budgets in an appropriate way. So it's and ideally, then you also implement the rest of those internal controls so that you can say, here's what budget is, and to the question that you asked earlier, here's what your budget is, here's what your spending plan is, how are you doing on both of those?
Joe, in our remaining moments here, what do we do going forward when we're facing this situation with a lot of the DOT's money, or at least some of it, based on the gas tax? And we know that our vehicles are getting more fuel efficient, so we're buying fewer gallons of gas. So that gas tax really isn't going to cover things like it used to. What do we do?
They're looking at vehicle mileage tax, and there's a pilot that's starting soon to take a look at that for people to be able to opt in. And part of it is that we just need to take a look at what are the roads that we need and how do we spend the money in the first place before we worry about how we finance it.